for unanimous consent to dispense with further reading of House Concurrent Resolution 9.
Unanimous consent has been requested. Is there objection? Hearing none, the gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. HCR 9 is referred to as the Faithful Delegate Resolution. It sets forth a manner in which delegates are properly called commissioners and are selected for an Article 5 Convention of the States should one be successfully called. The resolution sets forth the scope of authority for commissioners and provides a remedy for removing, recalling, suspending commissioners that exceed the scope of their authority. This resolution creates an advisory committee which monitors the activities of commissioners and may recommend the removal of any commissioner that exceeds their authority. The whole point of this concurrent resolution is to safeguard and make sure that there's accountability to ensure that we never have a runaway convention. The resolution sets forth guardrails so that this body can have comfort and faith that the committee is acting in accordance to the will of this body. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask for your green light.
Thank you, gentlemen. Is further debate on the motion? Hearing none. Hearing no. Gentleman 2.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Gentleman 3, answer a question.
Gentleman 3 yield the question.
The gentleman yields.
Gentleman yields.
Good gentleman, can you tell me in a House concurrent resolution what is binding in law or statute?
Gentleman from 3.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good gentleman from 2. I think the point of this was to set forth parameters in which we would be acting, but there is nothing binding in this.
Gentleman 3.
Mr.
Speaker.
2. To lightly debate against.
Gentleman has the floor.
Good ladies and gentlemen, I seem to be personally a little bit responsible for how this showed up because I had spoken to many people who are advocating for a convention of states to submit amendments to the Constitution, and I had much fear about something being done before we had stuff placed in our laws that would control the picking of delegates, the retrieval of rogue ones and stuff. And what I see here is a good idea put out in a resolution with no binding legal power. This is just good words that don't help us, don't hold anybody accountable to anything. And this is not what I had asked for. And therefore, I would be a red light on this alone. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Further debate on the motion. Gentleman from 11.
Mr. Speaker, I would request a roll call vote on this resolution.
Okay.
It does expend.
We need 3 to rise. Thank you. There'll be a roll call vote. Further debate on the motion. We're still debating the motion, though. Here, gentleman from 1.
Just very quickly, Mr. Speaker, thank you. I would like to debate the motion.
Gentleman has the floor.
Actually remembered. I would like to point out that in 1787, or later than that actually, during the Constitutional Convention, these very same parameters were placed upon the delegates of New York, New Jersey. I won't name all the nations that existed at that time, called themselves state. And they ignored them. And we had the only precedent for this type of convention that we know of occur, wherein they completely discarded the original document they were sent to amend. So I'm not so sure that since the federal government, which we've never learned to ignore as a state per the 9th and 10th Amendment, I'm not so sure that that federal government, who thinks, or actually rightfully thinks, they will control how the delegates are selected, would in any way assist us in keeping to the parameters that this resolution attempts to prescribe. So in light of that, I will be a red light on this resolution. Thank you.
For debate on the motion. The gentleman from 3 care to close the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Addressing those points again, we are directing in this resolution that the state of Idaho will be picking the delegates. And then I would like to say too, after we pass this, I'm happy to get it codified and bring back another bill. So thank you, good gentleman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Today's closed. Question is to House Concurrent Resolution 9 pass the House. Clerk will unlock the machine and the members will cast their votes. McCann. Does any member wish to change their vote? Clerk will lock the machine and record the roll. 27 ayes, 42 nay, 1 absent and excused. Less than the majority having voted in favor of House Concurrent Resolution 9. House Concurrent Resolution 9 has failed to pass the House and will be filed in the office of Chief Clerk. Gentleman from 22.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that House Concurrent Resolution 10 be placed at the top of the third reading calendar.
Unanimous consent has been requested to place House Concurrent Resolution number 10 at the top of the third reading calendar. Is there an objection? Hearing none, so ordered, and the House will have under consideration House Concurrent Resolution number 10. Good gentleman from 3.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask for unanimous consent to dispense with further reading of House Concurrent Resolution 10.
Unanimous consent has been requested. Is there objection? Hearing none, the gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bit of a glutton for punishment, apparently, today. It's well known that the U.S. is burdened with crushing national debt, bloated bureaucracy, and a Congress that refused to fix the issues that are most pressing to our country. For many years now, Congress just kicks the can down the road without finding meaningful solutions. Today, we have a national debt that is an absolute time bomb ticking. The thought of allowing for the current debt trajectory for my children and for many of our kids and grandkids is not something that I'm willing to do. We have members of Congress that were elected, have been elected longer than many in this body have been alive. We have federal bureaucracy that's constantly interfering with Americans' rights and dreams to pursue the American dream. Many have said that now that Trump's in office, D.C. is going to fix in office. It's going to fix all the problems. But an executive order by the president is not the same as addressing our constitutional rights. While DOJ is doing a lot of great things federally, and hopefully here in Idaho we're going to see some good stuff from our DOJ committee, I believe that Article 5 Convention of the States will cement things in our Constitution that would otherwise be left at the whims of the next administration. And the next administration could simply undo all the good work that we've seen already. This resolution is unique in that it contains 3 separate calls, one for a balanced budget amendment, one for a congressional term limit amendment, and then the third being for a call for the Convention of the States. This resolution also has a 7-year sunset. However, the legislature can rescind any of the calls at the will of the legislature. This resolution would move forward to growing the many states that have already come on board with all 3 of those resolutions. Article 5 was originally intended to allow amendments to Congress that Congress would propose and states would ratify. Yet before the Constitution was finished, the founders properly asked the question, what if Congress is actually the problem? They recognized that Congress would not reform itself if it meant limiting its own power. They recognized the dangers of a runaway Congress and the permanent ruling class. They amended Article 5 so that the states might be empowered to propose necessary amendments so that Congress would not be the obstruction needed for reform. So there's a couple ways that Article 5 of the Constitution outlines the process of amendments can be made to our Constitution. 1, amendments can be made by 2/3 of both houses in Congress, or amendments can be proposed by 2/3 of state legislatures by calling a convention of the states. Then, in both cases, the proposed amendments would have to be ratified by state legislatures of 3/4. Mr. Speaker, I believe that every individual here is elected and sitting here for such a time as this. I think that we have this tool in our Constitution for a reason. I think our founders knew, and I think they were guided by the wisdom of God to have that in there. And so, Mr. Speaker, I would ask for this body to be courageous and stand up and try to take back our government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, gentlemen. You've heard the motion. Is further debate on the motion? Good gentleman from 11.
Mr. Speaker, I request a roll call vote on this.
Thank Thank you, gentlemen. We can get to that when we get to a vote, but 3 must rise, and we will have a roll call vote. Good lady from 33.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate. Maybe.
Good lady has the floor to debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and friends. This had come to our committee, so some of you may have heard some of that, which I'm going to share already. But I'm going to share it again because I have some strong feelings. I'm not in favor of this. Let's start with this thought. It has a 7-year sunset. Think of all the changes that will take place in that time. We're presupposing things based on where they are right now. We'll have had two presidential elections, 3 or 4 congressional and state elections. The whole framework of where we are could change one way or the other, drastically one way or the other. We're putting forth our best case scenario and assuming, because we've had a practice run with best case scenario people, that in that case were chosen, that all will go that way. It will not. You know, when you think of a constitutional convention, the one we had, the original one, it'll never be original again. It'll never be special again. And I promise you, I promise this, if we have a second constitutional convention to supposedly correct the ills that our first constitutional convention somehow didn't manage to do, because the words, there's nothing wrong with our own Constitution. It's the people. And so to have another one, I promise you it'll be challenged in the courts. Everything on both sides will be challenged. And of necessity, there will need to be another one to fix what went wrong in the first one, or rather the second one. There will be. I promise you on that. That will happen. Now, one of the things that's very interesting, one of the arguments for this constitutional convention is that it was put in there by the founders. You guys realize it was a last-ditch effort. And you've all done that with your legislation, right? That we've had legislation and we're trying to get a consensus or at least get the votes, and so we make a change, anticipating that we're going to have that vote. Well, what happened here, we were down to the wire. It's September 15th. And they still had a couple people who weren't on, and that's Colonel George Mason and Elbridge Gerry. And they were just opposed to this idea of federalism. And so they wanted this Article 5. Now, the founders have spoken against this, and they've shared, you can go back through history and read what they said. They wanted this, and so a last-ditch effort was made with bringing an Article 5 on so as to bring their votes on. That's what they thought they would get. They wanted unity. Unity was incredibly important because, remember, the rest of the world was watching, and if this fell apart, if this didn't work, I mean, the French, the English, there were a lot of people that wanted to take over what we had. So they were watching, so they wanted unity. They did everything they could to get that unity, and guess what? Even when they put that part in for them, guess who voted against it? Those two very people. Now you think on your legislation, if you knew that you were making an exception for someone because you thought they'd vote for it, and then you found out they weren't going to vote for it, you wouldn't put that in there. You wouldn't. I'm asking you to think about it in terms of how you would function with your legislation. You wouldn't put it in there. Now, at that time, Madison even expressed reservations about the Article 5 because like, we don't need it. We already have a way to do amendments, but if this brings them on, I guess we'll do it. And so that's how they did it. It was not the centerpiece of the Constitution. It was not. It was literally a last-minute addition for unity. And then as soon as this passed, guess who called for another convention? Mason and Gerry. They immediately wanted another convention, exactly like is happening now. And the founders, they voted absolutely against that because they knew how hard it was to get to the point they had gotten, and another convention would be a failure. They could not do that, and so it was voted down. And Thomas Pickner even warned that calling another convention would lead to confusion and discord. And he said conventions are serious matters and should not be repeated. So I just think it's kind of important as we go forward to keep a little bit of that in mind. And I'm going to share one other thought. You know, George Barna, a major pollster, had been doing polling a couple years ago in back-to-back years where he was polling where people were with the Bible, and only 6% of Americans, this is in the last couple years, twice, 6% of Americans through George Barna's polling had a biblical worldview. Now, I'm not talking about affiliated with religion, but had a biblical worldview. And I'm like, oh my heck, 6%. Do you know how many of the people during the founders' time had a biblical worldview? And that's important because the Constitution was so centered around that. It was closer to 96%, not 6%. And so that led Glenn Beck to reverse his support of the Constitutional Convention, because Glenn Beck had been a huge supporter. And as this thought had been presented to him, Glenn Beck realized, and he said that he realized that we are not that people today that were that people 250 years ago. And that this people today, we were not humble enough. We did not turn to the Lord enough. We were not in that position to be those people that could call up and have another convention. And he said, someday maybe we'll be humble enough. Maybe someday we could do that, but we cannot do that today. And for that, he withdrew his support. And so I was hoping to give you some other thoughts, because we've all been hearing so many of the same arguments, and I think you'll hear more. But I wanted to share some other thoughts, even about how the Article 5 even really came about. That's literally from the founders' writings. And so I hope that maybe that would help. And I do have to say this. I have to say this because I have huge love and respect for the good gentleman in front of me. I do. If I had assurance, truly, that every delegate across the United States were to be a Jordan Redmond, or the good delegate, the good representative from District 4? Three? I would be more inclined to support that. But they will not be they will not be the gentleman from District 3. They just will not. So with that, I would ask you to give it your red light.
For the debate on the motion, gentleman from 22.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good ladies and gentlemen, to debate in favor of the motion.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good ladies and gentlemen. I struggle with the idea we don't want to have a balanced budget convention because it may run away. We've got a runaway government. The same people in this body and across the aisle that will vote against any federal dollars coming here don't want to tell the federal government, you need to cut your budget and get it back in line. We have, in previous legislation, have said that if the federal government cuts their share of the budget, then we have to cut ours, because we have a balanced budget. Federal government doesn't have anything close to a balanced budget. We have every good candidate come up and say, oh yeah, I'm going to cut the deficit, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and every time we keep spending more money than we have. We keep creating more debt than what we can afford. My grandkids can't afford the interest on the debt, let alone the debt, and yet it continues to climb. We've got to stop this spending of money we don't have and keep borrowing. And we look back at the original drafters of the Constitution, and you know how long it took before we actually instituted a federal income tax? Because they also didn't believe in spending money they didn't have. And yet now we don't want to try to control and don't want to tell them stop. We have to get the federal deficit in line, because as you run for election, it's a lot easier to go to your constituents and promise them this benefit, this dollar, this money, and you get reelected, than it is to tell them, you actually have to pay for it. You actually have to increase the taxes in order to pay for what I'm promising you. And we continue to promise benefits that we don't have money to pay for. And so, Mr. Speaker and members of this body, it's time that we as a legislature ask the federal government to operate under the same principles as Idaho, although I'm a little scared of Idaho because we're starting to be too dependent on federal dollars already, and maybe we're afraid to tell the federal government to, hey, get your budget in line, and all of a sudden we find out we're $4 billion short on income on the state side, and then we have to get our budget in line. And so, Mr. Speaker and good ladies and gentlemen, I would encourage your yes vote on this.
For debate on the motion. Gentleman 14.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Debate in favor.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the nail on the head at this point in time is the fiscal aspect of our country, and not just our country, but our state. The good gentleman from 22 has stated, I mean, you just look at our state and the amount of dependency we become on the federal government. That's more control of the federal government within our state. And the idea is and we've had people within this body and currently have stood up and said, well, just say no to that federal money. And then you go back and you say, well, if we say no to that federal money, then some other state's going to get it. In the end, our debt is going beyond control. If you go back to 1990s, we were at $2.9 trillion in debt. Our spending was at $1.1 trillion in debt. Now we're at $36 trillion in debt, $7 trillion in spending. You go to a 4-year projected average right now, we're at $46 trillion in debt with $10 trillion in spending. And you go another 4 years, which would be 8 years out from today, we're at $56 trillion in debt and $14 trillion in spending. If you notice, that ratio keeps growing further and further and further apart from each other. The fact of the matter is that ratio will continue to grow, same as your credit card, same as anything else. When you start looking at the amount of interest, we're currently spending $1.5 trillion on interest on our debt. This is unsustainable. This is beyond unsustainable. I don't care if you like a convention or you don't like the process, or you don't think this process is the right process. Either way, we have to actually address this and deal with this. Now, however you look at it, the founders gave us the ability. They gave us the sword. They gave us the sheath. We just, for some reason, forgot to figure out how to pull the sheath or pull the sword out of the sheath and actually deal with this issue from a state aspect. I would love to go in there and say no to all these federal programs, but the problem is that all these federal programs have ties to it that they've limited us on. They've taken too much control. She talks about Madison, when he actually got done with the Constitution, actually was in Congress, he actually said, I made a mistake. We gave the federal government too much power. This was, again, back to the very beginnings of the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. His argument, and he was 100% for the Federalist aspect, but then turned around and said, we made a mistake. We gave way too much power to the federal government and limited states. This is our power, this is our ability, this is our control to actually push back on. We are just one state. Still takes 2/3 to even address and go into on anything. It takes 3/4 to come out. If we think we're that far lost to the country, it saddens me even more. No matter what, in my opinion, no matter what actions we take today, no matter what actions we take in the future, at some point in time, it is going to be Congress that is going to probably try to take this up. They do not want the states to have this power. They do not want the states to have this control. And that's just a fact. I mean, you look at Congress, how it operates now. We ask for amendments for things that we want as a state, and they don't even look at us. They don't even respond back to us. It's because we have the disconnection has actually happened. But when we force them to do something, they will act. Will it be the balanced budget amendments that I would particularly want? Would it have the limits that I would personally want to see in there? No. They're going to give themselves some ways out to do some additional spending on some deficits on some aspect of it. Maybe it's your foreign debt, maybe it's your printing of money, but they'll limit themselves in some way. Hopefully it'll slow the spread. Either way, we're heading for disaster. Is that going to come in 4 years? In my opinion, I think the next recession, when it actually comes, it's going to be the last recession that we'll see before we actually see a true depression and our financial system no longer exists how we see it today. We don't have a backing. We don't have gold built up backing it. We have other countries doing that, building up mass amounts of reserves, and the U.S. is doing nothing. Ours is in trade. Ours is in oil, in foreign oil. Because they price the barrel of oil in the U.S. dollar. Well, we actually saw in the last several years, they actually turned around and they actually placed the first time in history that they actually turned around. They placed two different currencies in oil, small amounts, but no longer the U.S. We are losing that, and as soon as we do, we're dead on our feet. So I don't think we're at an option at this point in time. This should be an easy vote to actually to tell the federal government that enough is enough and to stand up and fight back. So I'd ask for your green light. Thank you.
Further debate on the motion. Good lady from 2.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to testify, or to debate.
Good lady has the floor to debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If you would have asked me about this legislation with a different administration, I may have had a different answer going in. I thought we were headed to a civil war where our country has. We have got so far off track. And when I've watched the new administration and what they've done in 30 days, it's been amazing. Do we have a spending problem? Yes. But a lot of that's our problem for taking money to allow the federal government to do things that they don't have the authority to do. But we want that money, so we keep taking it and we submit and allow them to violate the Constitution. And I do believe a lot of people in here have their minds made up, but I'd like you to think about something completely different that just got brought to my attention that really made me solidify where I am on this issue. I like to learn from history. I like to look at history, and I know we've all heard like, oh, it's not going to be a runaway convention, and I'm not going there. But what I'm going to talk about is back in 2020, the country of Chile decided that they were going to rewrite their constitution. And when they did that, they voted on it, and once they voted on it, there was a response. People respond to what we do in this body. And there was a response. Their S&P ISPA, their Chilean stock market dropped. Their peso dropped. And it caused a lot of uncertainty with the people. And this is my concern. Right now, I see a president of this country that's trying to turn the direction around of this country. I see him trying to reestablish our country as the global leader in the world. And I think that any movement by state legislators and other states that basically say, okay, now we want to look at the Constitution and cause uncertainty there, or make some amendments, or challenge Congress. We can challenge Congress without doing this. And so what I see is this will bring it will destabilize our country, and it will also be virtual signaling to these other countries that maybe we're not as strong as we're being portrayed in the public. I want to stand with this new administration. I want to give our government the chance and our country the chance to be the best country in the entire world, to take leadership. And what I don't want is to make little moves over here and cause major reactions with our stock market and with our dollar. We cannot afford that as a country right now. We're going to be a big target for the rest of the world because we are climbing back out into the global power to be number one in the world. And I just think this is the wrong move at the wrong time. And I would urge you to vote no for that very reason, to support the direction that this country is headed and what we have to offer the rest of the world. Thank you.
Are there further announcements? You're all laughing at me. Further debate on the motion. Good gentleman from one, you can do an announcement and a debate.
I'd like to announce that we're not going to vote on this amendment.
I'd like to announce you're wrong.
Debate the bill, Mr.
Good gentleman has the floor.
So I'm going to try not to debate very long, although my dictum has always been never use a sentence when a paragraph will do. But I'd like you to have in the back of your mind a picture of the Obama administration legislature or the Biden administration legislature and what they did and violated the Constitution pretty much daily. Even this legislature, I would allege, has done the same thing. Mr. Speaker, a question. Do I have to have permission to read from the unanimous declaration, the Declaration of Independence?
No.
Okay, thank you. Here's what we're doing if we walk down this path. We're going to be asking people who have taken a violation of the Constitution and elevated it to an art form. They are so good at violating it that there ought to be regular awards for it. I think I can think of who some of the winners might be. But we're going to take what might come out of a convention and put it back in the hands of people whose specialty is violating the document we've tried to protect. The Constitutional Convention process, the amendment process itself was designed to effectively correct defects in the Constitution. Now, I'm not a sacred text person. I don't believe the Constitution is sacred, but I think it's the best method of government that has evolved on this planet in the last 6,000 years. And I think we need to be very careful with it. It's not the problem in the Constitution that we're dealing with. It's the problems in the people who are not following it that we're dealing with. You've heard that argument before. Now, I'm going to propose to you, in your mind now, with a picture of the legislatures of the last few years and the ballooning national debt, the violation of states' rights, the violation of individual liberties, constitutional defectives that have happened over these last, say, 12, 15 years. Let's pretend. Now, this is my unicorn. I get to have my own unicorn. Let's pretend that a convention is called and that it proceeds immaculately. Let's pretend that only decent considerations are passed. Let's further pretend that it's sent to the states and the states ratify those excellent decisions. Now, those decisions are put into the hands of the current legislature of the United States, who have taken violating the Constitution, as I said, to the level of an art form. Why would there be any difference to what we have now? So I'm not going to end this with a hopelessness. There is a method, and it's Article 9 and Article 10. I believe that this Idaho legislature and maybe one or two other state legislatures are in the excellent position to have the kind of people involved to do the right thing in taking back these powers that the states have had abrogated or taken from them by the federal government. So I'm going to jump ahead so I'm not too much longer. The states need to interpose. And when the Constitutional Convention was called back in the time of the founding, the worldview at the time, which was put to paper by the artful penmanship of the Declaration Committee, which we all ascribed to Thomas Jefferson, but it was actually a committee, they said this: whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government laying on its foundations such principles, etc. That was the worldview, that was the ethos that put into place the runaway convention, thank you, that produced our current Constitution. We are in the excellent position, I think, with a state legislature and a few other states that have similar legislatures that could actually do the hard work of reinstituting the proper alignment between the two governments, the state governments and the federal governments. It'll take a lot of work, but the states need to look their disobedient federal child in the eyes and take away the car keys. It's said, by the way, Madison said that in Federalist 40, that it was that worldview that we could alter or abolish governments that led them to do what they did in the amendment Constitution that was supposed to fix the Articles of Confederation. They fixed it all right. They jettisoned it and gave us what we have. Madison also said this in the Federalist. He said, but ambitious encroachments of the federal government on the authority of the state governments would not excite the opposition of a single state or of a few states only. They would be signals of general alarm. Every government would espouse the common cause. A correspondence would be open. Plans of resistance would be concerted. One spirit would animate and conduct the whole. Ladies and gentlemen, we're wasting valuable time. We don't know how long this will take. If this resolution passes and we somehow see other states do the same thing and we enter the Constitutional Convention era, we don't know how long it will take, but we can begin setting things to right. We've got a joint finance committee that knows how to manage money. We've got legislators in here that understand the document they swore an oath to uphold. I believe we're in an enviable position to begin a correspondence and to resist. We need to not waste valuable time. We need to be busy working on the business of taking back our Article 1 responsibilities and powers and rights. And so for those reasons, I think we're on a precipice, and we can do this. We can start this, but wasting time on a constitutional convention that will never actually follow my unicorn plan there. Wasting time on that is not something we can do. It's been pointed out that we are on a financial precipice as well. And so for those reasons, I'm urging you to vote against this, and let's get busy doing what Madison said and get a correspondence going.
Further debate on the motion. Gentleman 14.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to debate in favor of the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
I think the key, I understand the frustrations and the fear that's out there, but the key guardrail on this, whatever goes, if the Congress decides, 2/3 of Congress decides there's going to be an amendment, it still requires 3/4 of all state legislatures to ratify this. That's the key guardrail. If they do it, a convention or not. And I use the example of the ERA. What happened there is they went through Congress, got 2/3, they never achieved 3/4 ratification within the deadline. So I'm thinking all this fear is something that we can temper with that guardrail. I'm confident with that guardrail. 38 states have to come through, so it won't be just California and so forth. It has to be all the states. It's a consistent guardrail. I'm comfortable with it. I think that this is a good move forward. I'm going to vote green for this bill.
For the debate on the motion. Gentleman from 5 or 3, yeah, 5.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I'd like to read.
Gentleman wants to debate the
I would
bill.
like to debate against the motion.
Gentleman has the floor.
First of all, I'd like to read a simplified version of Article 5 because there's some common misunderstanding that the legislatures will necessarily have to approve this. So I'll read just the abbreviated version.
Are you reading out of the Constitution or one that you're making? If you're making on your own, then we need to ask for unanimous consent to read if we're changing it.
I have not. I would like to have unanimous consent to read an abbreviated version of what's in the United States Constitution that we have already sworn an oath to uphold and defend.
Unanimous consent has been requested. Objection? Hearing none. Gentleman, read.
The Congress shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which shall be valid when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states or by conventions in 3/4 thereof. We're not guaranteed to have the amendments come to this legislature to approve. It can be by a convention of 3/4 of the states, which we have absolutely no control over. We as states ask for a convention to be called, and then it's Congress's duty to set the rules, the time, place, and the rules thereof. So don't be concerned about us being able to approve that. It could be a convention, and we have no idea how those delegates would be assigned. For my debate, I'd like to refer you to the sheet that was handed out. It's a colored sheet that's got a list of all the states and their electoral college votes. If you look at the top 3 states, California, Texas, and Florida, you see that combined they have 124 votes. And this is in the Electoral College. Now, Congress will decide how the delegates will be selected. And back in 1973, there was a Federal Constitutional Convention Procedure Act that was proposed. And although it didn't make it all the way through Congress, it was certainly passed by the Senate, who realized that the large states will want a bigger seat at the table than the smaller states. And that goes to reason. I mean, California is not going to get one vote, and Idaho one vote as well. It's going to be based on proportionality, and the Electoral College distribution is fair. So if you look at the top 3 states, 125 votes, that has to be balanced by 25 of the states that have lower Electoral College votes. So if we think that Idaho has any control over what happens, we think we're the tail that's going to wag the dog. We're a small hair on that tail that's going to try and wag that dog. We are not very much in control. This causes me great consternation. Now that we've established that the large states will control what happens at the convention, and even the freshman representatives here in this House recognize that there's a lot of horse trading and log rolling that occurs here making law, there will be some concessions that have to be made in order to get our points across. Now, with that in mind, do we really want to have those amendments that California and some of the other larger states, Illinois, Pennsylvania, some of the purple states or deep blue states, what rights are you willing to give up? You willing to give up any of your First Amendment rights to religion, speech, press, freedom to assemble, freedom to address the government for your grievances? Which one of those do you want to give up? How about the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable searches of your private papers and belongings? The Fifth Amendment right, so you don't have to be forced to provide evidence against yourself. How about the 10th Amendment? That's a perfect piece of legislation that was passed by Congress. The limitations on our federal government that are not being followed today. How about the Second Amendment? And in my opinion, that's the most important one. There are movements from some of the states to completely eliminate the protection that is given to us by the Second Amendment. Others will say, well, we'll soften it, we'll just sugarcoat it, and we will allow sporting and hunting weaponry, and we'll have reasonable limitations on the use of firearms. It took the United States 200 years for the Heller decision from the United States Supreme Court in order to verify what the Constitution said in the Second Amendment, that an individual, not the militia, has the right to bear arms, keep and bear arms. So what if we have a total ban on the Second Amendment? Is that possible? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. Now, my parents grew up during World War I. My dad fought in the Second World War. Poland was the first nation that was attacked. They had gun control. The Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto could not defend themselves because there was gun control. My parents told me that, yes, they had the right to do hunting and sporting, but you had to keep your gun at a club locked up. Well, guess where the Soviets came and the Germans came first to take away those guns? They didn't come to individual houses one at a time where the Polish people had a chance to fight. They went to those lockers, and the Polish people suffered for 60 years under communism. Now, we also have to realize that at the Battle of Lexington and Concord, the British were marching on the arms that the colonists had at Lexington and Concord. And we were successful in starting the first battle to make sure that we had that right to defend ourselves. So in closing, no hurrah. In closing, we're not only opening up a convention, we're putting the Constitution on a gurney and rolling it into the surgery room, and we don't even know whether those surgeons are qualified. Now, some consider the Constitution to be a sacred document, divinely inspired. And for those of us, all of us, whether you believe that or not, please give some prayerful consideration on this vote. Thank you.
Further debate on the motion? Hearing none. Gentleman from 11.
To debate against the resolution, Mr.
Gentleman
Speaker.
has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good ladies and gentlemen of the body, I've given a lot of thought to this, this constitutional Article 5 convention, and the main question that I've always come back to, that I've asked myself again and again, and I've asked other people about it, and I really have failed to get a clear and concise answer on that, is this. How do new words on an old document suddenly change the way that our government conducts business on a daily basis? If our government is incapable of ruling itself and regulating itself, given the confines of the Constitution as it is written, and of the laws that are currently written, when the three separate branches of our government consistently fail to maintain that separation of power, given that the Constitution outlines that all three of those branches have a specific place in our government, and yet they frequently venture outside of the bounds of their power, of that confined limitations of the Constitution. I don't know how further amendments would make this change. With the talking about term limits, right? Term limits is not a new thing. There are term limits that were put into the Constitution. There were exact terms of the Senate has 6 years and House Representatives have 2 years, right? That gives us, as the electorate, the ability to vote for new people when that term is up. There are many states, maybe Idaho isn't one of them, but there are many states out there who would absolutely love to change the concept or the scope of what the Second Amendment details. Without the Second Amendment, I would argue that our Constitution is dead on arrival. And to echo the many of the sentiments and the opinions put forth by the good gentleman from District 5, which one of those amendments do we want to give up? Which one of those amendments do we want to roll the dice and see how we can lose it? And I, for one, don't want to be a yes vote on a resolution that might completely destroy what we have. Our Constitution has withstood the test of time as it is written. It has been around since its ratification, in place for approximately 237 years. And I absolutely don't want to see the greatest country in the world that has had the most solid Constitution ever written, that enshrines the rights that God has given to us, to be undermined or destroyed or overturned by radical forces in the United States and from around the world that would absolutely love to watch the United States of America fall. So my deepest desire today is to confer my hope that everybody in here will see this from the fundamental standpoint of what we could possibly lose. And I would absolutely request that everyone in here look deep inside themselves and ask if they want to see their children and their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren grow up in a communist country or in a country that is free, as we have all currently enjoyed that freedom. And I would ask for your red light on this resolution.
Further debate on the motion. Delay from 18.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate against the bill.
The lady has the floor.
Thank you. I wanted to respond to some of the things I've heard on the floor today. This has been a topic I have been immersed in up to my eyeballs for over a decade. I can't count how many legal research articles and law review articles, et cetera. So one question we have is, well, it's in Article 5. Why would it be in there if we weren't intended to use it? Well, when our founding fathers wrote Article 5, they actually have two mechanisms for amending our Constitution. The first one goes through Congress, goes to the states. We see it in black and white. We see exactly what we're voting on. That is the only method that has ever been used for the 27 amendments we have. Then we have this wildly untested method that we're talking about today. Now, I believe the reason our founding fathers put that in there, they had no idea how this thing was going to work out. They were starting a whole new country on a model that had never been tried anywhere before. And so they thought, you know, we hope this is going to work out. We think we have some good ideas here. Seems sensible. But it might be a flaming train wreck. It's entirely possible in 20 years the thing didn't work out at all and they have to completely go back to the drawing board and start from scratch and write a whole new Constitution. That's what this is. This is a whole new convention. We're going to start from scratch and write a new Constitution. That's in the flaming train wreck scenario. That is not where we are, people. We have an incredible country. We have the longest lasting, most successful Constitution on earth. We are the greatest country on earth. We are not a flaming train wreck where we have to just go back to the starting board and start all over. Do we have problems? Sure. Is our national debt too big? Absolutely. We should do something about it. But this is not the thing to do. This is something we can address our national debt within the structures that we have. We don't need to risk burning down our entire system of government to address the debt. Nor do we have any reason to think that addressing the debt is what would even come out of this thing. The Congressional Research Service, they wrote a 43-page document. I urge you all to read it. There's lots of legal analysis in there. It's pretty clear that there's absolutely no way to confine this convention to any topics whatsoever. So this is just nice window dressing in here. They're like, oh, we want them to talk about term limits and limiting the debt and balanced budget. There is no reason at all that they have to do that. They could absolutely get in there and say, we want to shut down the First Amendment, shut down the Second Amendment, and the Electoral College. They can do anything they want, and that is crystal clear from this analysis, that any limitations are null and void on what they can discuss when they get in there. We also have absolutely no idea who's going to do the deciding. Now, I've heard in this debate, and I've heard elsewhere, well, there's nothing to worry about because in the end, it all has to go through this ratification process. So we'll all have the final say. There can't be anything really kooky that happens because we'll get to shoot it down later. That is not a safeguard that you should count on at all. And history will tell you otherwise. So the original convention, as was discussed in 1787, they went in under the rules of the Articles of Confederation, which required 100% ratification. They got in, they said, you know what, 100% is too hard, let's knock it down to 75%. And those became the new rules for ratification. There is no reason this new convention couldn't do exactly the same thing. They could get in and say, 3/4 of the states is too hard, let's knock it down to half. So don't believe that we have this safeguard of a 75% ratification. One more thing, doesn't need to be by the legislatures. The Constitution in Article 5 says it can be by legislatures or conventions. No guidelines around what the conventions are. And that's, again, this is all contained within a half a sentence in the U.S. Constitution. So we're in very uncharted territory on how this could all play out. But again, history gives us some guidance. Those conventions can be rigged. Congress can decide who gets to be in those conventions. We aren't necessarily going to be the ones who decide whether Idaho approves or not. Congress can pick 50 of their best friends and they can be the convention that decides whether Idaho ratifies the Constitution. This happened in the 21st Amendment. Congress was worried about whether they were going to get enough approvals from the state legislatures, so they bypassed some of the state legislatures. In Utah, anybody think Utah is a big heavy drinking state? Somehow, they managed to set up a convention in Utah that ratified with 100% approval the repeal of prohibition. Seem odd? This is the sort of stuff that can happen. Congress has total control over this process. Ratification should give you zero comfort. The existing rules around ratification can be completely gutted, reworked, can bypass us. Anything can come out of this process. Now, I sat in the committee where this was discussed. They flew in the big guns. I got to hear Rick Santorum say, there is no possible way this can go awry. You have my word for it. There is no possibility of a runaway convention. But for every guy like that, I can roll out, between 5 and 10 constitutional law professors, Supreme Court justices, and federal judges who will say, absolutely, there's a risk of a runaway convention. And really, the only certainty here is that there is uncertainty. The only thing we are sure of, you ask 100 scholars, you will get very different questions across the board on whether there is a very real possibility of a runaway convention or nothing to worry about here. But when you're looking at this degree of risk, how can we, in good conscience, subject our most precious document to this kind of risk? We can't take the Constitution and bet it all on black and hope for the best. It is too precious. It is what we are built on. And that's really what I want to close on here. We can fix our problems through the conventional amendment process if we decide we really want a balanced budget amendment. We can put more heat on Congress to balance the budget. This is not the way to do it, because the thing that makes our Constitution so absolutely amazing is the universal buy-in. That's the secret sauce, I think, even more than the content. The content is terrific, but the thing that makes it amazing is that everybody from Bernie Sanders to Steve Bannon, from Alana Rubel to Judy Boyle, hopefully you have our article on your desk, absolutely everybody of every political stripe believes in our Constitution to the fiber of their being. We don't agree on anything in America anymore. There is no unity. No, people can't agree what color the sky is or which way is up, but we all agree that we love our Constitution and would die for it. And we would lose that. That is the most precious secret sauce that we will lose if it goes through this process. Because, maybe you'll get your way in it, maybe I'll get my way in it. Somebody's going to find some way to jam what they want down the throats of the other half of America that doesn't want it. And maybe they'll win, and they think they had a victory for that day because they got to stick in the thing in the Constitution that they wanted, that a bunch of people, other people didn't want. But what you end up with is a document that doesn't have buy-in anymore. What you end up with is a document that half of America's ticked off about, that feels like they had it stuck to them and that they're going to spend the rest of their life plotting to overturn. We would have destroyed something so unspeakably precious in that scenario. It's not a win. I mean, if I got to be the one who went and rewrite the Constitution and I could put every single thing I wanted in there, it would not be a win because half of you would hate it. And we wouldn't have a Constitution that everybody loves and supports anymore. The stakes are so incredibly high on this that this is not a throwaway vote, folks. We're getting dangerously close to the threshold where this actually happens. And I think it's time for us to do the right thing, stop this in its tracks, and stand up for our beloved Constitution. This is a dangerous plan. I know it has all the good intent in the world, but it leads us down a really dangerous road with the most important thing that we have. So I hope you will give this bill a no. I only wish I had a hell no button on my phone.
For debate on the motion, Gentleman 15.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be brief and hopefully not redundant. I have a lot of constituents who have reached out to me on the concern primarily in support of this, primarily because of the national debt. And I absolutely empathize with them, and I share their concerns as well. It's a huge problem, and they want it solved, and they see a Congress that's doing nothing about it. The question is whether the cure is going to be worse, than the illness. The fact is, there is no precedent for the exercising of Article 5 in the U.S. Constitution, which means that it ultimately will probably be the Supreme Court that gets to decide on this issue of can it be a single issue or can it be an open convention. And no one, not a single person, can guarantee you the answer to that question. Now, if I was on the Supreme Court or just looking at the Constitution, I'd say a logical decision path would be we already have a method in the Constitution for single issues, and that's the amendment process. So therefore, a constitutional convention is different than a single method for amending the Constitution. But there's another consideration, too, that I've not heard, and that is, let's roll back the clock. At the original creation of the Constitution, the delegates were sequestered. They were kept isolated. Who thinks that we can ever duplicate that environment today, where there wouldn't be cell phones, there wouldn't be people trying to influence whoever these delegates are? So you have to recognize that the conditions have changed for trying to create a constitution, even if it was a single issue in a convention. So at the end of the day, I guess the thing that concerns me the most is they're not making founding fathers the way they used to. And I think this takes us down a path that can lead to outcomes we don't anticipate and consequences we don't want. So I'm a no on this, with all due respect to my constituents who want to see the national debt resolved, and I share that concern, but this isn't the way to do it.
Further debate on the motion. Lady from 9.
Mr. Speaker, are you reading that upside down?
No, I'm looking at Representative from 33's head. The lady has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate against the motion.
Lady has the floor.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I have been firmly against this for literally decades. This is a very, very dangerous thing to do. As we have heard, there are 2 ways to amend our Constitution. And all of the money that has been spent to try to get the states to do these resolutions, if that would have been spent just lobbying Congress for whatever amendment they want, it would have happened a long time ago, which tells me there must be a different motive to this. Now, none of us like where we're at with that budget back there. It is horrendously terrible. Back in the late 90s, I worked for Congress. That was when the class of 94 came in, the very, very conservative class, and we were $7 trillion in debt. That was astronomical back then. And so what they did, these conservative members, they had a group called CATS, Conservative Action Team. They were the original Doge. They met every Friday, and they would take a different agency. All of them had specialties. My congressman was a natural resource congressman. That was her specialty. So they would take these different agencies, they would meet, they would figure out how to balance that budget, and they did get in the black during the Clinton administration. So it can be done. It just takes effort, which I think we are seeing in DC, without a doubt. We don't need to go to these kind of extreme measures to get what we want, a balanced budget. We all want that. But think of it. Congress has passed laws repeatedly through the years to balance the budget, and they've ignored them, just as they have ignored the Constitution. There's nothing wrong with our Constitution. It's the people who don't follow it, the people who don't believe in their oath of office to protect and defend it. I'm very worried of what would ever happen if we did this, which is why I've always fought against it, which is why over $250,000 was spent against me in a primary to try to get rid of me because I am so opposed to this. I would call that dark money. People worry about dark money coming from Texas. Well, this is dark money coming from who knows where. And it's a whole lot more than what we have seen in the last primary. My oath is to protect and defend the Constitution, and I will do that to my dying breath. I would ask you to vote against this. Thank you.
For debate on the motion, gentleman from 30.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you. Good ladies and good gentlemen, I'll be a green light on this. My thoughts just very briefly. I believe that there is a danger of the Constitution and the principles that it stands for being undermined. I think that as I consider what, statistically speaking, is the greatest threat to those principles in that document, it's not Article 5 of the very document that we're trying to protect. It's the $36 trillion and ever-growing debt that we have on a federal level. I've said many times, if somebody tells me a path to get that debt under control, that I will be interested in pursuing that path instead of going down a path of Article 5. I haven't seen yet anyone who has a proposal for doing so, I think we need to act. I think if we do act, I still think it's statistically pretty unlikely that an Article 5 convention is actually convened, but I think it gives people who are in this fight against the national debt and reining that in tools that aren't otherwise available to do that. I'll close lightheartedly with some words from the late, great Chris Christopherson. I'd rather be sorry for something that I did than for something I didn't do. Let's do something. Let's act. Let's give the green light. Thank you.
Further debate. Gentleman 27.
To debate the bill?
On the floor.
I'd also like to speak in favor of it. I think to myself as we have this discussion, it's the same discussion I heard 15 years ago. Had we have done something 15 years ago, maybe something would look different now. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. I don't think there's so many what ifs here that are unknown. I'm like the gentleman from District Doreen's Head. Dory's Head, District 30. There is absolutely so many what ifs, but I would like to 10 or 15 years from now at least tell my grandkids when all of a sudden they wake up one morning and the dollar's devalued to 50 cents that I tried something. I was willing to stretch a little bit. And like the gentleman said, the chances of 3/4 of the states agreeing on anything these days is pretty minuscule. But I would like to throw this option out there, and what better time to do it than with the current administration that's willing to think outside the box and go after the problems we have. Give a little support. Thank you.
Thank you. Is further debate on the motion? Gentleman from 8.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate.
On the floor.
So we were talking about debt, which I think concerns everybody here, but one thing that the reason I think we have so much debt is because we have an unlimited money supply. In the 1970s, we got an unlimited money supply because we detached ourselves, the US dollar, from gold, right? And so that constrained the amount of dollars that were printed. There was a finite amount of it. Now it's unlimited. We don't need to change the Constitution to have a balanced budget. We need to get back to limiting the money supply, and you do that by hooking our dollars back to a gold standard. Other countries, as was mentioned before, are doing it. Russia, China, Poland, Thailand, all these countries buy metric tons of gold. And now going to gold standard will make me look really smart, and that's part of the reason I'm probably for it, but it really will limit what we can do here, and that's a much better option and much less risky than amending the U.S. Constitution.
Further debate. Gentleman 2.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate against, just quickly here, you know,
Gentleman
we're
has
hearing
the floor to debate against the motion.
Thank you. We're hearing a lot of things, and just to address some things, when I have talked, and I'm not talking about the people in this room or this good body, but when I've talked to several of the people who have brought these proposals to me in the hallways, and I exercise some thinking on the dangers that are going, they don't necessarily disagree that this is danger. What they tell me is, oh, we're never going to get there. There'll be preemption. You know, the fact that some of the people who are promoting this might feel that the actual action of the convention itself would be as dangerous as some of us on this floor is concerning. And as far as, you know, trying to get a balanced budget, not waking up to our money be worth less than it is in our pocket, we're already there. For the 1990s till to now, we're dealing with an actual about 300% inflation if you measure against what we all use in our households. So even if we were to do this, the money in your pocket will be worth less than you think it is, because as the good gentleman in 8 has already commented, we've printed ourselves into oblivion against nothing, backed by nothing, other than we all use it for trade and we have faith that it'll keep going. And whether we fix this or not, that's going to fall apart. That will be something that we will all have to endure. So I just think this is a road that I'd rather see us exercise the 9th and 10th Amendment. And when we keep talking about the federal government, we have to remember, we have representatives in that body as well as every other state. And if our representatives aren't already doing what we ask, how do we think that's going to be any different?
Further debate. Hearing none. Gentleman from 3. Would you like to debate?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, debate for the bill.
Get on our feet, guys. Gentleman floor.
Thank you. I want to lighten the mood a little bit. Everybody is so serious here. It is a very serious topic, and that's fine. But let me lighten it up a little bit. I want to tell you a story a little bit. Some of you know I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. And in Brooklyn, we lived on the streets. Come the end of school day or throughout the summer, we were on the streets playing games. And those games were, you may not know these names, but I'm going to tell Johnny on the Pony, or red light and green light, triangle, touch football. There was a time when I ran a down and out pattern and almost impaled myself on the fin of a 59 Cadillac. I still have the scar, I think. My favorite was stickball. Stickball was a game that kind of emulated baseball, and what you had was a broomstick with cut off with the electrical tape on the bottom, and you used to hit a pink ball. And I was a one sewer guy. I can hit the distance of one sewer down the street, or I can hit my neighbor's window and break it, which happened a couple of times as well. But these are all team sports, and I guess I learned the value of teams and cooperating with people and being around people that had the same ideas and values that I do. And those people that we associate with, that we spend the most of our time with, we share the values and the goals and our dreams about the future. And you get a sense that you're headed in the right direction when you're with your team, when you're with the people that agree with you. And I would submit to you that we are still playing team sports. We are still doing kind of perhaps a left and a right, a conservative, liberal, libertarian, or whatever, independent, unaffiliated, whatever you'd like to call it. We still depend on our teams for much of what we do here on the floor. And when I look at the opponents of the Article 5 Convention, not including you folks on the floor here, but the public opponents of the Article 5 conventions, I see the names of teams that I have spent the majority of my adult life fighting against. And I will give you some of those names. Common Cause is opposed to the Article 5 convention. Emily's List is opposed. The League of Women Voters. Greenpeace. La Raza. George Soros and his minions. And then I look at the other side. And I look at those that are in favor of an Article 5 convention. And who do I find there? Vice President J.D. Vance, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, Speaker Mike Johnson, Senator Rand Paul, Governor DeSantis, Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, the Heritage Foundation, Mark Levin, and the late Rush Limbaugh. So I ask you, who do you think has the best interests of this country in mind? Who do you trust to have done the research on this and to say that it's the right way to go? Do you trust the people of Emily's List or Greenpeace or La Raza? Or do you trust the people that surround this current administration and are part of this current administration who say that this is what they want to do? Administrations come and go, my friends, and I'm very happy. I think many of us are very happy at what's going on in Washington now. But in 4 years, that may all go away. We have a process problem. The process problem that exists is the way the federal government is functioning. And it is the state's right to define what the federal government does. We have to take that right back. Article 5 gives us that ability to do it. So again, I ask you, who do you trust? Look at the two lists. Who do you think is right?
Third debate, gentleman 24.
Mr. Speaker, to debate.
Gentleman has the floor.
I really appreciate the debate we've had, and this has cleared up some of the things the gentleman from over yonder, 5, I enjoyed that. But I think there are some additional truths here. According to Google, 28 of our states are Republican-controlled states, 4 of them are split. 19 states have a resolution. We're so far from attaining this that even if we had a single subject resolution, I just don't. It's improbable that would happen. But I do think that if we go ahead and support this, it does send a message. And I believe that that messaging is valuable, but shown in the 80s as the resolutions were adopted across the states that Congress reacted to that. So I think we have a lesson there. So for that reason, even though I understand there is an inherent danger in the process where it's successful, I'm going to support this. I'm still alive.
The rest of us aren't. Further debate on the motion. Okay, good gentleman from 3, would you prepare to close the debate?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, good body. I really do appreciate the debate. I appreciate all the points of view. A few minor corrections I'd like to make is it was mentioned several times that this was a constitutional convention or a con-con. That is not what we're doing here. We're doing a convention of the states. And all that convention can do is bring forth proposals that have to be ratified by the 38 states. That's only been done 27 times in our country's history. You know, one of the arguments was, well, what if they change that? Well, to change the ratification process, it needs to be ratified by 38 states. Again, in history, every single convention has been one state, one vote. So I don't think the Electoral College would be mentioned there. The good lady from 2 had mentioned, you know, what Chile did. However, they rewrote their entire constitution. All we're asking for is proposals that need to be ratified by 38 states. We're not changing our entire constitution, and this was put in place by our founding fathers for this exact reason, for this exact time. The budget was mentioned many times. You know, we have 36 trillion in debt. Many in this body are strong believers in what DOGE is doing. DOGE's goal is to reduce spending by $1 billion per day. But to even eliminate the annual deficit currently, they'd need to be $5 billion per day. So even with all the good that this administration and DOGE is doing, we still need a convention of the states. Again, I really do appreciate the debate. So many of the folks debating are close friends of mine. I think we all agree that there's an extreme issue and a major problem. Finding that way to do that is where we maybe disagree. But I would ask for this body to be courageous and hit that green light and walk down this path and put in place what the founders had for us. One more minor thing I wanted to mention was the ballot budget amendment has 27 states currently. Term limits is at 9, and the Convention of States is at 19. So again, I would ask that Idaho join those movements and push back against our federal government's overreach. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hey, good gentlemen, debate is closed. Question is to House Concurrent Resolution 10 pass the House. Clerk will unlock the machine. Members will cast their votes. Has every member voted? Representative Greens. Does any member wish to change their vote? Clerk will lock the machine and report the pairs.
Wheeler votes aye. Galaviz votes nay. Crane 13 votes aye. Matthias votes nay.
26 ayes, 44 nays, less than a majority having voted in favor of House Concurrent Resolution number 10. House Concurrent Resolution 10 has failed to pass the House and will be filed in the office of the Chief Clerk. Without objection, the House now advance to the 15th order of business. Announcements. The House is at the 15th